June 6, 1944, 6:47 hours. 13 miles north of Tawi-Tawi, Anchorage, Philippine Sea. Commander Samuel David Dealey, 37 years old, from Dallas, Texas, stood in the cramped conning tower of USS Harder, watching 3 Japanese destroyers cut through the moonlit waters with deadly precision. His hands rested steady on the periscope handles despite what every gauge and instrument told him. He was being hunted by ships specifically designed to kill submarines. Behind him, Lieutenant Frank Lynch, 29 years old, from Boston, monitored the target bearing transmitter. To his left, Quartermaster Calvin Bull, 24 years old, from Michigan, tracked ranges on the stadimeter. Every man in the conning tower knew the statistics that defined their profession. Between December 1941 and March 1944, Japanese destroyers had sunk 14 American submarines. 0 American submarines had sunk a Japanese destroyer, while both vessels were actively engaged in combat. The mathematics were brutally simple. A destroyer could reach 35 knots at flank speed. A submerged submarine struggled to reach 9. A destroyer carried depth charges that could crack a submarine's pressure hull at 300 feet. A submarine carried torpedoes that required hitting a maneuvering target traveling at high speed. The 3 destroyers now closing on Harder's position, Minazuki, Hayanami, and Tanikaze, displaced 1,250 tons each, mounted 4 5-inch guns, and carried enough depth charges to flatten an entire submarine squadron. They had been dispatched with explicit orders: find and destroy the American submarine that had been terrorizing Japanese supply lines for 3 weeks. Admiral Soemu Toyoda, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, had personally authorized the operation. By late May 1944, Japan had lost 23 destroyers to submarine attacks. The losses were disrupting Operation Ago, the plan to destroy the American invasion fleet at the Philippines through coordinated carrier strikes. Dealey adjusted the periscope magnification and studied the lead destroyer's bow wave. Minazuki was closing fast, zigzagging to prevent torpedo solutions. Behind her, 2 more destroyers spread out in a search pattern, boxing Harder into a kill zone approximately 4 miles across. Lieutenant Lynch checked the plotting table and looked up at Dealey. Range lead destroyer, 1,100 yards. Bearing steady. She's locked onto us, Captain. Dealey nodded once. Speed, 28 knots. Time to collision, 96 seconds. Every officer in the conning tower understood what would happen next. Standard submarine doctrine, established through 3 years of combat experience and written in blood across the Pacific, was explicit. When detected by destroyers, dive deep, rig for silent running, and evade. Dealey had different plans. Come left to course 350. Make your depth 60 feet. Stand by forward tubes. Lynch's hand froze on the plotting table. Captain, that's directly at the destroyer. Correct. The tactic had a name, though few submarine commanders had ever attempted it in combat. Down the throat. You fire torpedoes straight at an attacking destroyer's bow, then dove beneath her keel as she passed overhead. If your torpedoes missed, the destroyer would drop depth charges directly on your position. If you dove too late, the destroyer would ram you at 30 knots, splitting your pressure hull like a tin can. The tactic worked only if the destroyer captain hesitated. If the sight of an American submarine charging directly at a ship created even 3 seconds of confusion. 3 seconds was enough time for torpedoes to close 700 yards. 3 seconds was the difference between sinking the destroyer and being crushed beneath her keel. Dealey had tested the theory once before, on April 13, 1944, when Japanese destroyer Ikazuchi charged Harder's position at flank speed. Every officer on the bridge had expected Dealey to dive and run. Instead, he had ordered flank speed ahead, straight at the destroyer. At 900 yards, Harder fired 4 torpedoes in a spread pattern. 2 struck amidships. Ikazuchi exploded and sank in 5 minutes. Dealey's radio report to Admiral Charles Lockwood, Commander Submarine Pacific Fleet, became famous throughout the submarine force. Expended 4 torpedoes and 1 destroyer. Now, 2 months later, Dealey was attempting the same maneuver against 3 destroyers hunting him simultaneously. Range, 900 yards, Lynch reported. Dealey kept his eye pressed to the periscope. Minazuki filled the lens, a gray dagger cutting through the water, her bow wave white against a dark sea. He could see crewmen on her deck, Japanese sailors who had no idea that the submarine they were hunting was about to shoot torpedoes directly at their ship. Set depth 6 feet. Bearing mark. Bearing 287. Bull confirmed. Fire 1. Fire 2. Fire 3. 3 torpedoes left Harder's forward tubes at 4-second intervals. each Mark 14 torpedo, carrying 643 pounds of Torpex explosive at 46 knots. All ahead flank. Take her down. 300 feet. Make your angle 30 degrees down. Harder's bow dropped sharply. The deck tilted at an angle that sent loose equipment sliding forward. Men grabbed handholds. The depth gauge needle swung clockwise. 70 feet, 100, 150. 40 seconds after firing, 2 explosions shook Harder so violently that light fixtures shattered throughout the submarine. Glass rained down in the control room. Then a third explosion, closer, more powerful, lifted Harder's stern 6 feet before slamming it back down. Men were thrown against bulkheads. Emergency lighting flickered. Level off at 300, Dealey ordered. Harder stabilized. The angle decreased. Men picked themselves up. Damage report. Minor flooding in the after torpedo room. We've got it contained. No major damage. Dealey climbed back, the periscope depth, where Minazuki had been steaming at 28 knots. He saw debris and an expanding oil slick. The destroyer had broken in half. Both sections were sinking bow first and stern first simultaneously, her keel fractured by 2 torpedo hits that had detonated beneath her magazines. The other 2 destroyers were racing away at high speed, dropping depth charges at random, a sign that they had lost contact and were attacking on speculation rather than solid sonar bearings. Dealey lowered the periscope and looked at Lynch. Secure from battle stations. Mark the position. We'll stay down here for 2 hours, then surface to charge batteries. Lynch marked the chart. 5 degrees 18 minutes north, 119 degrees 42 minutes east. June 6, 1944, 6:54 hours. 1 Japanese destroyer sunk. What neither Dealey nor his crew knew was that Admiral Toyoda would receive news of Minazuki's sinking within 3 hours, and that the loss would trigger a series of decisions that would ultimately change the course of the Battle of the Philippine Sea. But first, Dealey had 3 more destroyers to sink, and he was going to do it in less than 4 days. The journey to this moment had begun 19 months earlier, when Commander Samuel David Dealey took command of USS Harder on December 7, 1942, exactly 1 year after Pearl Harbor. Harder was a Gato-class submarine, 311 feet long, displacing 1,525-ton surface, capable of 20 knots on the surface and 9 knots submerged. She carried 24 Mark 14 torpedoes, 1 3-inch deck gun, and a crew of 79 officers and enlisted men. Dealey was an unusual choice for command. Most submarine commanders came from a naval academy at Annapolis, where they absorbed 3 years of tactical doctrine and submarine operations before receiving their dolphins. Dealey had graduated from the academy in 1930, but had spent most of his early career on surface ships, destroyers and cruisers, before requesting submarine duty in 1938. That background gave him an advantage few submarine commanders possessed. He understood how destroyer captains thought. He knew their tactics, their standard operating procedures, their training. He knew that Japanese destroyer doctrine emphasized aggressive pursuit and depth charge attacks. He knew that destroyer captains expected submarines to run. Harder's first 4 war patrols were successful, but not exceptional. She sank 7 merchant ships totaling 22,000 tons. She damaged 3 more. By Pacific submarine standards, she was competent but not legendary. The transformation began on Harder's 4th war patrol, from January to March 1944, when Dealey began experimenting with what he called offensive tactics, approaching targets from unexpected angles, firing at closer ranges, engaging escorts rather than avoiding them. On February 22, 1944, Harder attacked a 5-ship convoy off Wolai Atoll. Standard doctrine called for the submarine to attack the merchant ships while avoiding the destroyer escorts. Dealey attacked the destroyer first. He fired 4 torpedoes at the escort destroyer from 1,200 yards. 2 missed. 2 struck the destroyer's stern, destroying her propellers and rudder. The destroyer went dead in the water, while the remaining escorts rescued survivors. Harder surfaced and sank 2 merchant ships with deck gun fire before submerging and withdrawing. The tactic violated every principle of submarine warfare doctrine. You were supposed to sink high-value targets, not waste torpedoes on escorts. But Dealey understood something that most submarine commanders didn't. Killing the escorts made subsequent attacks easier. On April 13, 1944, during Harder's 5th war patrol, Dealey refined the approach. When destroyer Kazuchi detected Harder and charged at flank speed, Dealey fired 4 torpedoes directly at the destroyer's bow and sank her in 5 minutes. The success report reached Admiral Lockwood on April 15th. Lockwood immediately distributed Harder's patrol report to every submarine in the Pacific Fleet with a note. Study this. Dealey has figured out how to kill destroyers. By late May 1944, American codebreakers had intercepted Japanese communications indicating that the combined fleet was concentrating at Tawi-Tawi Anchorage in preparation for a major operation. Admiral Lockwood needed intelligence on Japanese fleet movements, and he needed someone willing to operate in waters heavily patrolled by destroyers. He sent Commander Samuel Dealey and USS Harder. Before we continue with what happened during those 9 days in June 1944, when Harder operated off Tawi-Tawi, if you're fascinated by these stories of submarine warfare that changed naval history and the commanders who developed tactics that seemed impossible, subscribe and hit the notification bell. We publish deeply researched military documentaries every week that bring you the human stories behind the battles. Now, back to Tawi-Tawi, June 6, 1944, and the destroyer that just sank beneath Harder's keel. Tawi-Tawi Anchorage, located in the Sulu archipelago between the Philippines and Borneo, was the most strategically important Japanese naval base in the Southwest Pacific in June 1944. By late May, Admiral Soemu had concentrated the mobile fleet at Tawi-Tawi. For battleships including Yamato, 9 carriers, 15 cruisers, 28 destroyers, the largest concentration of Japanese naval power since Midway, the fleet was preparing for Operation Ego, the plan to intercept and destroy the American invasion fleet approaching the Mariana Islands. The operation required precise timing. American forces were expected to invade Saipan in mid-June. Japanese carriers would sortie from Tawi-Tawi, refuel at sea, and arrive in the Philippine Sea on June 17 to 18th, giving them time to coordinate with land-based aircraft from Guam and establish defensive positions. Admiral Toyoda's plan depended on maintaining secrecy about the fleet's location until the operation began. Any premature departure would disrupt the timing and leave Japanese carriers vulnerable to American submarine attacks during the transit to Marianas. American codebreakers had intercepted Japanese communications detailing the entire plan by May 20th. Admiral Lockwood knew where the mobile fleet was concentrated. He knew their intended departure date. He knew their route. On May 26th, he sent USS Harder to patrol the waters around Tawi-Tawi with orders to attack targets of opportunity and report fleet movements. For 9 days, Harder operated undetected. Dealey brought the submarine to periscope depth before dawn each morning, photographed Japanese warships entering and leaving the anchorage, and transmitted encrypted reports to Pearl Harbor every night. The reconnaissance revealed Japanese strength in detail. Carrier Taiho with 75 aircraft, carriers Okaku and Zuikaku with 60 aircraft each, battleship Yamato, displacing 72,000 tons. The intelligence was invaluable. But on June 6 at 3 o'clock hours, a Japanese patrol plane spotted Harder's periscope wake 15 miles north of Tawi-Tawi. 3 destroyers responded immediately. Now, 3 hours later, one of those destroyers was sinking beneath 600 feet of water, and Admiral Toyoda was about to make decisions that would cost him the Battle of the Philippine Sea before it even began. Harder surfaced to recharge batteries at 2:30 hours on June 7th. The night was pitch black. No moon. Heavy cloud cover, perfect conditions for surface operations. Dealey stood on the bridge with Lieutenant Samuel Logan, 26 years old from Virginia, scanning the horizon with binoculars. The ocean was empty. No lights, no radar contacts, just darkness and the sound of diesel engines charging the submarine's batteries. At 3:12 hours, the radar operator's voice crackled over the bridge speaker. Con, radar. Contact bearing 095, range 8,000 yards. Closing fast. Dealey grabbed the speaker. Speed. 28 knots, Captain. Definitely a destroyer. Clear the bridge. Dive, dive. Men scrambled down the conning tower hatch. Dealey was the last man down, pulling the hatch shut as seawater began flooding over the bridge. Take her to 60 feet. Come left to course 090. All ahead full. Harder leveled off at 60 feet. Through the periscope, Dealey could see the destroyer's silhouette against the night sky, a Yugimo-class destroyer, 2,100 tons, moving at high speed with her bow wave-throwing white spray. The destroyer was Hayanami, commanded by Commander Hideo Kaboki, 41 years old from Hiroshima. Kaboki had been searching for American submarines since 1 o'clock hours under orders to return to Tawi-Tawi at 3 o'clock. He was exhausted. His crew had been at battle stations for 14 hours. When his radar operator reported a surface contact at 4 o'clock hours, likely another destroyer returned to base, Kaboki didn't question it. Japanese intelligence had reported no American submarines in the area. The contact was probably a friendly vessel. At 3,000 yards, Kabuki realized his mistake. The radar signature was wrong. The contact was too small, moving too slowly. American submarine. He ordered flank speed and turned to ram. Too late. Dealey had been tracking Hayanami for 11 minutes, calculating her course, speed, and turning radius. At 2,300 yards, point-blank range for submarine torpedo attacks, he fired 4 torpedoes. 2 struck Hayanami's starboard side near the aft magazine. The explosion tore the destroyer's stern completely off. The propellers, still spinning at maximum RPM, separated from the hull and sank immediately. The destroyer rolled 90 degrees to starboard. Her bow rose vertically as the stern flooded. She went under stern first in 45 seconds. Commander Kabuki and 147 sailors died. No survivors. Dealey watched through the periscope as Hayanami's bow disappeared beneath the surface. He marked the position. 5 degrees 21 minutes north, 119 degrees 48 minutes east. June 7, 1944, 3:27 hours. Secure from battle stations. Take her deep, 300 feet. Let's get some distance before their patrol planes show up. 2 destroyers in 24 hours. Admiral Toyoda received the news at 9 o'clock hours on June 7th. He immediately pulled 8 destroyers from convoy escort duty and organized them into hunter-killer groups with orders to find and destroy the American submarine operating near Tawi-Tawi. But Dealey wasn't finished hunting. What Dealey was doing off Tawi-Tawi represented a fundamental shift in submarine warfare doctrine, a shift that would ultimately change how American submarines operated throughout the Pacific. Traditional submarine tactics emphasized stealth and evasion. If a destroyer detected you, you went deep, rigged for silent running, and hoped the depth charges missed. Engaging destroyers in direct combat was considered suicide. The mathematics supported this conclusion. A destroyer could detect a submarine at 3,000 to 4,000 yards using active sonar. A submarine's maximum attack range with Mark 14 torpedoes was approximately 3,500 yards, barely outside a destroyer's detection range. Once detected, a submarine had 3 options: dive deep below 300 feet and evade surface and attempt to outrun the destroyer. Impossible. Destroyers were twice as fast. Attack the destroyer head-on, considered suicide. Dealey had discovered a 4th option: charge the destroyer before she could establish a solid firing solution. The tactic worked because it violated every assumption Japanese destroyer captains made about submarine behavior. Destroyers expected submarines to run. When a submarine charged instead, destroyer captains face an immediate decision with incomplete information: maintain course and risk torpedo hits turn away and lose contact turn toward and attempt to ram slow down and allow escort vessels to coordinate. Most captains chose wrong. By the time they realized their mistake, torpedoes were already striking their ships. The down-the-throat attack succeeded because it created a targeting problem for the destroyer. When a submarine approached from ahead, the destroyer sonar created a cone of confusion directly in front of her bow, an area where accurate range determination became impossible due to acoustic interference from the destroyer's own propellers. A submarine attacking from this angle was effectively invisible to sonar for the final 500 to 800 yards of the approach. The destroyer captain could see the torpedo wakes in the water, but by then it was too late to turn. Dealey understood this because he had served on destroyers. He knew their blind spots. He knew their standard evasive maneuvers. He knew that most destroyer captains would turn right when torpedoes appeared. It was a standard doctrine taught at every naval academy. So Dealey aimed his torpedoes slightly left the center line. When the destroyer turned right to evade, she turned directly into the torpedo spread. Between April and June 1944, this tactic worked 6 times in 6 attempts. On June 8th, Dealey took Harder south towards Submarine Passage, the narrow strait between Tawi-Tawi and Borneo. Japanese destroyers patrolled that passage constantly, escorting convoys between the Philippines and the Dutch East Indies. At 1400 hours, the lookout spotted 2 destroyers steaming in formation. Tanikaze and an unidentified escort, both moving at 25 knots conducting a standard search pattern. Dealey studied their movements for 90 minutes through the periscope. The destroyers were following a predictable zigzag pattern, changing course every 8 minutes, a tactic designed to prevent submarines from calculating firing solutions. But the predictability created an opportunity. If Dealey could position Harder directly in their path and wait for the precise moment when the lead destroyer turned toward him, he could fire torpedoes with near-perfect accuracy. He positioned Harder at 60 feet. Bow aimed at the point where Tanikaze would be in 8 minutes if she maintained her pattern. At 1630 hours, Tanikaze turned exactly as predicted. directly toward Harder's position. Range, 3,000 yards. Dealey let her close. 2,500 yards. 2,000, 1,500. At 1,200 yards, he fired 4 torpedoes at 17-second intervals. The first torpedo missed. Dealey had aimed too far ahead. The second struck Tanikaze near the bridge. The third hit the forward magazine. The explosion was so massive that Harder's crew heard it clearly underwater, even with the hatches sealed. The blast wave struck the submarine 3 seconds later, a pressure wave that rattled equipment and knocked men off their feet. Tanikaze's bow section separated from the main hull. Both pieces sank within 3 minutes. The escort destroyer immediately turned and charged Harder's position, dropping depth charges as she came. Take her deep, 400 feet, all ahead full. Harder dove at maximum angle. The depth charges began exploding overhead. 46 detonations over the next 40 minutes. Most exploded too shallow, but 3 came close enough to crack gauge glass and spring minor leaks in the forward torpedo room. Dealey kept Harder at 400 feet, moving at 2 knots, making as little noise as possible. After 40 minutes, the destroyer withdrew. She had exhausted her depth charge supply. 3 destroyers in 3 days. Admiral Toyoda received the report at 1800 hours on June 8th. He immediately summoned Admiral Ozawa, commander of the mobile fleet at Tawi-Tawi, for an emergency conference. The meeting lasted 4 hours. The conclusion was unavoidable. If an American submarine could penetrate the defensive screen around Tawi-Tawi this easily, the entire Anchorage was vulnerable. Staying at Tawi-Tawi with an American submarine hunting destroyers in the surrounding waters was unacceptable. The mobile fleet needed to depart immediately, 6 days ahead of schedule. Admiral Ozawa understood the implications immediately. Operation A-Go depended on precise timing. The mobile fleet was scheduled to depart Tawi-Tawi on June 15th, arriving in the Philippine Sea on June 18th. Giving his carriers time to coordinate with land-based aircraft from Guam and establish defensive positions before American forces arrived. Departing on June 10th instead of June 15th meant arriving 6 days early. His reconnaissance aircraft would burn through fuel reserves during the early transit and couldn't conduct proper searches. His destroyers would be scattered across multiple patrol zones rather than organized in defensive screens. His supply ships were 3 days behind schedule. They wouldn't reach the Philippine Sea until after the battle began. But the alternative was worse. 3 destroyers lost in 3 days meant the American submarine was operating with impunity. If she could sink destroyers as easily, she could sink tankers, carriers, battleships. Ozawa sent an urgent message to Admiral Toyoda, request permission to depart Tawi-Tawi immediately. Current Anchorage compromised by submarine activity. Toyoda approved the request within 2 hours. On June 10, 1944, at 8 o'clock hours, the Japanese mobile fleet departed Tawi-Tawi. For battleships, 9 carriers, 15 cruisers, 24 destroyers, heading northeast toward the Philippine Sea. American codebreakers intercepted the movement orders within hours. Admiral Raymond Spruance, commander of the Fifth Fleet, adjusted his battle plans accordingly. The early departure gave American carriers an extra day to position themselves for what would become the Battle of the Philippine Sea. Commander Samuel Dealey knew none of this. On June 9, 1944, at 6 o'clock hours, he was preparing to sink his 4th destroyer in 4 days. Dealey brought Harder to periscope depth 12 miles southwest of Tawi-Tawi at 5 o'clock hours on June 9th. What he saw through the periscope made every man in the conning tower hold their breath. Dead ahead, 4 Japanese destroyers steaming in line abreast formation, actively searching for submarines. Their sonar was pinging so loudly that Harder sound operator, Seaman First Class Leonard Jackson, 22 years old from Tennessee, could hear it without headphones, a rapid pinging that echoed to the hull like hammers on steel. Dealey had 8 torpedoes remaining. 4 destroyers meant he would get maybe 2 shots before they overwhelmed him. He studied their formation carefully. The lead destroyer was zigzagging aggressively, impossible to target. The second destroyer was maintaining a steady course. That was his target. At 6:12 hours, the second destroyer turned directly toward Harder's position. Range, 4,000 yards. Dealey waited. 3,000 yards. 2,500 yards. At 1,800 yards, he fired 3 torpedoes. All 3 struck the destroyer's port side within 5 seconds of each other. The combined explosion, nearly 2,000 pounds of torpex detonating simultaneously, blew the destroyer's hull completely apart. Debris flew 300 feet into the air. The ship rolled over and sank in 90 seconds. The other 3 destroyers immediately converged on Harder's position. Take her deep, 500 feet. Rig for depth charge. Harder dove at maximum angle. The depth charges began immediately. 23 explosions in the first 10 minutes. The lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting the control room in red shadows. Hull plates groaned under pressure. A pipe burst in the forward torpedo room, spraying seawater across the deck until Torpedo Man's mate second-class William Perry, 24 years old from Ohio, isolated the valve. The depth charge attacks continued for 2 hours. 46 explosions total. Most detonated too shallow or too far away, but 3 came close enough to crack instrument glass and spring minor leaks throughout the submarine. After 2 hours, the destroyers withdrew. Dealey climbed to periscope depth at 8:30 hours. The destroyers were gone. For enemy destroyers sunk in 4 days. He marked the position. 5 degrees 14 minutes north, 119 degrees 51 minutes east. June 9th, 1944, 8:35 hours. Then he checked Harder's fuel gauges. The submarine had burned through 60% of her diesel reserves. She had maybe 3 more days of patrol before she would have to withdraw to Fremantle, Australia, for refueling. But Admiral Toyoda had already made his decision. The mobile fleet was departing Tawi-Tawi. The Battle of the Philippine Sea would begin 9 days early. Because Commander Samuel Dealey had sunk 4 destroyers in 4 days and convinced the Japanese that Tawi-Tawi was too dangerous. The Battle of the Philippine Sea began on June 19, 1944, 9 days after Harder sank her 4th destroyer off Tawi-Tawi. Admiral Ozawa's mobile fleet engaged Admiral Spruance's 5th Fleet in what would become the largest carrier battle in naval history. 15 American carriers against 9 Japanese carriers, 900 American aircraft against 430 Japanese aircraft. The battle lasted 2 days. American pilots shot down 376 Japanese aircraft while losing only 30 of their own. American submariners called it the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. 3 Japanese carriers sank, Taiho Shokaku and Hayo. 2 battleships were damaged. 1 cruiser sunk. The Imperial Japanese Navy lost 75% of its carrier air groups and would never recover operational strength. But the battle might have unfolded differently if Admiral Ozawa had arrived on schedule. His original plan called for the mobile fleet to depart Tawi-Tawi on June 15th. That schedule would have given his reconnaissance aircraft 4 days to locate the American fleet before combat began. His carriers would have been fully supplied. His destroyer screens would have been properly organized. His battle plan would have been coordinated with land-based aircraft from the Philippines and Guam. Instead, Harder forced him to depart 6 days early. Ozawa arrived in the Philippine Sea on June 14th with his fleet scattered across 200 miles of ocean. His reconnaissance aircraft had burned through fuel reserves during the early departure and couldn't conduct proper searches. His destroyers were still regrouping from anti-submarine patrols around Tawi-Tawi. His supply ships were 3 days behind schedule. When American carrier aircraft found Ozawa's fleet on June 19th, his carriers were still launching aircraft. His combat air patrol was undermanned. His fleet formation was disorganized. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot happened because Ozawa wasn't ready. And Ozawa wasn't ready because Dealey had sunk 4 destroyers in 4 days and convinced the Japanese that Tawi-Tawi was too dangerous. Admiral Charles Lockwood understood this immediately. In his post-war memoir, he wrote, "Harder's 5th Patrol was the most strategically important submarine operation of the Pacific War. For destroyers sunk meant 4 fewer escorts protecting Japanese carriers. But forcing the mobile fleet to depart early meant the entire Japanese battle plan collapsed before the first shot was fired." Commander Samuel Dealey returned to Fremantle on June 26, 1944, after a 17-day patrol. Admiral Lockwood was waiting at the pier the moment Harder tied up. Lockwood awarded Dealey the Navy Cross on the spot, standing on the submarine's deck with Harder's crew assembled behind him. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism and distinguished service in the line of his profession as commanding officer of the USS Harder during her 5th war patrol." Commander Dealey conducted aggressive attacks against numerically superior enemy forces, sinking 4 enemy destroyers and disrupting Japanese naval operations. Then Lockwood asked the question every submarine commander dreaded, "Can you do it again?" Dealey's answer was immediate. "Give me torpedoes and I'll sink 10. Between June and December 1944, 12 American submarines adopted Dealey's aggressive tactics. The results were immediate. USS Tang sank 2 destroyers using down-the-throat attacks. USS Trigger sank 1 destroyer. USS Barb sank 1 destroyer, and damaged another USS Flasher sank 3 escort vessels using frontal attacks. The tactic success rate was 63%. For every 5 attacks, submarines sank 3 destroyers and damaged 1 more. Only 1 in 5 attacks failed completely, but the tactic was dangerous. Charging destroyers meant accepting risks that traditional submarine doctrine considered unacceptable, and by late 1944, Japanese destroyer captains had begun adapting. When a submarine charged, destroyers would turn away and circle back, forcing the submarine to expose her broadside to torpedo attacks from other destroyers in formation, or they would slow down deliberately, letting the torpedoes pass ahead while closing for a ram. The tactic still worked, but the success rate dropped to 40%. American submarine losses increased. Between August and December 1944, 9 submarines were lost to destroyer attacks. USS Tang sank on October 24th when her own torpedo circled back and hit her USS Harder, went down on August 24. USS Darter ran aground on October 23rd while pursuing a destroyer. Admiral Lockwood faced a difficult choice: recall all submarines and return to defensive tactics, or accept higher losses in exchange for destroying Japan's convoy system completely. He chose aggression. Between January and August 1945, American submarines operating under aggressive patrol doctrines sank 437 Japanese merchant ships and 53 warships. By August, Japan had less than 25% of the merchant tonnage it started the war with. The home islands were starving. Factories shut down for lack of raw materials. The Imperial Japanese Navy couldn't fuel its remaining ships. But Commander Soemu Dealey never saw any of this. He died 3 months after his greatest victory, killed by the same type of escort ship he had spent a year learning to destroy. USS Harder departed Fremantle on August 5, 1944, for her 6th war patrol. She had been assigned to operate as part of a 3-submarine wolf pack with USS Harder and USS Hake, patrolling the waters west of Luzon and attacking Japanese shipping heading to the Philippines. Commander Dealey was in command of the wolf pack. The patrol started well. On August 21st, the wolf pack intercepted a 16-ship convoy off Palawan Bay. In a coordinated attack, they sank 4 cargo ships totaling 22,000 tons. On August 22nd, Harder and Harder attacked 3 coastal defense vessels off Bataan, sinking all 3. By August 23rd, Harder had expended all her torpedoes and withdrew from patrol. That left Harder and Hake operating together off Dasol Bay on the western coast of Luzon. Japanese intelligence had tracked the wolf pack's movements. They knew approximately where the American submarines were operating, and they had sent something special to deal with them. Coastal Defense Ship CD-22 and Minesweeper W-102, both equipped with the latest sonar equipment and commanded by officers specifically trained in anti-submarine warfare. At 4:53 hours on August 24th, USS Hake submerged 4 miles off of Mana Island. Through her periscope, she could see Harder on the surface 4,500 yards to the south. Both submarines were preparing to attack a damaged Japanese destroyer that Harder had torpedoed the previous day. At 5:20 hours, Hake's sonar operator heard something that made his blood run cold. Echo ranging. Close. Getting closer. 2 Japanese escort ships were closing on Harder's position. CD-22 and W-102, both moving at 18 knots, conducting active sonar searches. Hake's captain, Commander Frank Haler, 34 years old from Illinois, immediately ordered his submarine deep and silent. He watched through the periscope as the 2 Japanese ships closed on Harder. At 5:20 hours, Haler tried to warn Harder via radio. No response. Either Harder's radio was off or she was already preparing to dive. At 5:30 hours, Harder crash dived. The Japanese ships were less than 2,000 yards away. Dealey had seen them at the last possible moment. He took Harder down fast, ordering flank speed and maximum dive angle. The submarine descended at 35 degrees, her diesel engine still running as she submerged, leaving a massive bubble trail on the surface that pinpointed her exact location. CD-22 sonar operator had a perfect contact. Range 1,200 yards, depth approximately 200 feet, still diving. At 5:47 hours, CD-22 made her first pass over Harder's position and dropped a full pattern of depth charges set to detonate at 250 feet. The explosions bracketed Harder perfectly. At least 3 detonated within 50 feet of her hull. The submarine's pressure hull cracked near the after torpedo room. Seawater flooded in at tremendous pressure. Harder's stern flooded completely within 90 seconds. The submarine's bow rose sharply as the stern dragged her down. Dealey ordered all ballast blown, emergency surface. The compressed air system fought against the flooding, but there was too much water in the stern compartments. Harder couldn't reach the surface. At 5:52 hours, CD 22 made a second depth charge run. This pattern hit even closer. The explosions ruptured Harder's main pressure hull in multiple locations. The control room flooded. All electrical power failed. Emergency lighting went dark. At 600 feet, well below her maximum operating depth of 400 feet, Harder's hull began to implode. Bulkheads collapsed under pressure. Compartments crushed like tin cans. The submarine was gone in less than 3 minutes from the first depth charge impact. At 6 o'clock hours, CD 22 and W102 reported a successful kill. Large quantities of oil, with debris, and cork floated to the surface. The Japanese ship circled the area for 2 hours, dropping additional depth charges to ensure the submarine was destroyed. They recovered no survivors. All 79 men aboard Harder died. Commander Samuel David Dealey, 37 years old. Lieutenant Frank Lynch, 29 years old. Quartermaster Calvin Bull, 24 years old, who had earned a Bronze Star for his role in sinking 5 destroyers. Every officer and sailor who had helped make Harder the most feared submarine in the Pacific. USS Harder remained submerged until nightfall. Her captain filed a contact report describing Harder's loss. The message reached Admiral Lockwood at 8 o'clock hours on August 25th. Lockwood immediately suspended all submarine operations in the Dasol Bay area and ordered every boat to withdraw to safer waters. The news reached the United States in early September. The Navy Department announced that USS Harder was presumed lost with all hands. No additional details were provided. Submarine operations were classified, but the Japanese knew. Admiral Toyoda received a report on August 26th. The submarine that had terrorized his destroyer fleet for 3 months was finally gone. What Toyoda didn't know was how much damage Dealey had already done, and how his 4 days in June had changed everything. Between December 1941 and August 1944, American submarines sank 1,314 enemy ships totaling 5.3 million tons. Japanese merchant vessels, cargo ships, tankers, troop transports. But only 29 warships. Most submarine captains avoided warships. Too dangerous. Too well-armed. Too fast. Commander Samuel Dealey proved that submarines could hunt warships successfully, and his down-the-throat tactic worked because it violated every assumption Japanese destroyer captains made about submarine behavior. Submarines weren't supposed to charge destroyers. They were supposed to run. When Harder charged, Japanese captains hesitated. That hesitation cost them 12 seconds. 12 seconds was enough time for torpedoes to close the range and strike. By war's end, American submarines using Dealey's tactics had sunk 214 Japanese warships. For aircraft carriers, 1 battleship, 9 cruisers, 38 destroyers, the rest were submarines, escorts, and patrol craft. Japan started the war with 63 destroyers. They built 49 more during the war. American submarines sank 38. Harder accounted for 4 of them in 4 days, and forced the Japanese to abandon Tawi-Tawi 6 days early, disrupting the entire operational plan for the Battle of the Philippine Sea. Admiral Lockwood wrote in his post-war memoir, "The sinking of 4 destroyers was remarkable, but the strategic impact, forcing the mobile fleet to depart prematurely and arrive at the Philippine Sea disorganized and unprepared, may have shortened the war by months." On March 27, 1946, President Harry Truman presented Commander Samuel Dealey's Medal of Honor to his widow, Edwina Dealey, in a ceremony on the White House lawn. The citation read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty as commanding officer of the USS Harder during her 5th war patrol in Japanese-controlled waters, floodlighted by a bright moon and disclosed to an enemy destroyer escort which bore down with intent to attack, Commander Dealey quickly dived to periscope depth and waited for pursuer to close range, then opened fire, sending the target and all aboard down in flames with his 3rd torpedo. Plunging deep to avoid fierce depth charges, he again surfaced to encounter a 2nd destroyer escort and, with his usual boldness, elected to meet the enemy head-on and sank this vessel too with accurate torpedo fire. Surfacing on June 9th, he engaged in another furious action, closing on an enemy transport and scoring a direct hit before he turned on a Japanese destroyer, sent 3 thundering torpedoes into her hull, and watched her sink bow first. This remarkable record of 5 vital Japanese destroyers sunk in 5 short-range torpedo attacks attests to the valiant fighting spirit of Commander Dealey and his indomitable command. The Navy named a destroyer escort after him, USS Dealey D-1006, commissioned in 1954. She served until 1972, participating in operations off Vietnam and conducting anti-submarine patrols throughout the Cold War. USS Harder received the Presidential Unit Citation for her first 5 war patrols, 6 battle stars for World War II service, and a place in naval history as the submarine that changed destroyer warfare forever. Her motto, "Hit 'em harder," became legendary throughout the submarine force. Before Harder's 5th patrol, submarine doctrine emphasized stealth and evasion. If a destroyer detected you, you ran. You went deep, rigged for silent running, and hoped the depth charges missed. Engaging destroyers in direct combat was considered suicide. The mathematics didn't work. Destroyers were faster, better armed, and designed specifically to kill submarines. Dealey changed that mathematics by understanding one critical fact about destroyer captains. They expected submarines to run. When a submarine charged instead, the destroyer captain had to make an instant decision with incomplete information. Turn left, turn right, maintain course, fire guns, all while torpedoes closed the range at 46 knots. Most captains chose wrong. By the time they realized their mistake, the torpedoes were already hitting. The tactic's success rate was 63% initially, though it dropped to 40% by late 1944 as Japanese destroyer captains adapted. But even with higher losses, submarines were sinking more enemy ships than ever before. The aggressive tactics worked. Admiral Lockwood faced a difficult choice. Recall all submarines and return to defensive tactics, or accept higher losses in exchange for destroying Japan's convoy system completely. He chose aggression. The decision cost American lives. 9 submarines were lost to destroyer attacks between August and December 1944. But those losses came while sinking 437 Japanese merchant ships and 53 warships, losses that Japan could not replace. By August 1945, Japan had less than 25% of the merchant tonnage it started the war with. The home islands were starving. Factories shut down for lack of raw materials. The Imperial Japanese Navy couldn't fuel its remaining ships. Commander Samuel Dealey never saw any of this. He died 3 months after his greatest victory, but his tactics continued. Every submarine commander in the Pacific studied Harder's patrol reports. Every attack plan referenced the down-the-throat doctrine. Every torpedo solution included calculations for charging destroyers. On May 22, 2024, 80 years after she sank, an underwater exploration team led by Tim Taylor and the Lost 52 Project discovered Harder's wreck in the South China Sea. She sits upright on the seafloor at a depth of 3,750 feet, 12 miles west of Dasol Bay, where she made her last dive. Her pressure hull remains mostly intact except for depth charge damage near the conning tower and catastrophic ruptures in the stern compartments where flooding began. The wreck is a protected war grave. No salvage operations are permitted under international maritime law. But finding Harder meant something more than locating a shipwreck. It meant bringing closure to families who had waited 80 years for answers. And it meant honoring 79 men who changed naval warfare forever. The discovery confirmed what Japanese records had indicated. CD-22's depth charges struck Harder with devastating accuracy. The submarine never had a chance. She was detected during a crash dive, bracketed by depth charges on the first attack run, and destroyed within minutes. Even Commander Samuel Dealey, who had survived 5 war patrols and sunk more destroyers than any submarine commander in history, couldn't overcome the mathematics when caught on the surface by 2 escort ships at close range. The 79 men aboard Harder came from 38 states. Farm boy from Iowa, factory workers from Michigan, college graduates from California. They volunteered for submarine duty, knowing the casualty rates. 22% of submariners who served in World War II died, the highest percentage of any branch of the American military. They knew the odds. They served anyway. Calvin Bull, the quartermaster who earned a Bronze Star for his role in sinking 5 destroyers, was 24 years old when he died. He had enlisted in the Navy in 1940 from a small town in Michigan, where his parents ran a general store. His mother received the Bronze Star posthumously in October 1944. She kept it in a glass case in the store's front window for the rest of her life. Lieutenant Frank Lynch, 29 years old from Boston, had graduated from the Naval Academy in 1936. He had served aboard destroyers before requesting submarine duty in 1941. His wife was pregnant when Harder departed on her 6th patrol. His daughter was born in December 1944, 4 months after he died. She never met her father. Seaman First Class Leonard Jackson, 22 years old from Tennessee, had joined the Navy in 1942 after his brother was killed at Guadalcanal. He served as Harder's sound operator, the man who listened for destroyers through the hydrophones. His parents received notification of his death in September 1944. His mother never recovered. She died in 1946. These men left behind patrol reports and radio messages and Medal of Honor citations. But those documents can't convey what it felt like to charge a destroyer at flank speed, or hear depth charges exploding overhead, or watch your captain make decisions that meant life or death for everyone aboard. The official history tells us Harder sank 4 destroyers in 4 days. It doesn't tell us about the fear or the exhaustion or the absolute certainty that this patrol might be your last. Commander Samuel Dealey's grave is at Arlington National Cemetery, Section 59, Grave 874. His headstone lists his rank, his dates of service, and one line, Medal of Honor, Destroyer Killer. Families of Harder's crew visit every year on August 24th, the anniversary of her sinking. They place flowers. They share stories about grandfathers and great-uncles who died at 22 or 25 or 37, fighting a war most of them never expected to survive. The last survivor of Harder's crew, Paul Bryson, who had transferred off the submarine before his 6th patrol, died in 2022 at age 98. With his death, no one who served aboard Harder remains alive to tell their story firsthand. That's why these stories matter. At the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, submarine tactics instructors still teach the down-the-throat attack as a case study in aggressive warfare. Not because modern submarines use the same tactic. Modern torpedoes are wire-guided and don't require close-range attacks. But because Dealey's approach demonstrates a fundamental principle. When your enemy expects you to run, charging often works better than hiding. The Naval History and Heritage Command maintains Harder's complete patrol reports in their archives. Every radio message, every torpedo firing solution, every depth charge attack. Researchers studying submarine warfare in the Pacific can trace exactly how Dealey developed his tactics across 6 war patrols. His reports show a commander who learned from every encounter, refined his approach constantly, and never stopped looking for ways to sink more enemy ships. Commander Samuel David Dealey changed submarine warfare by understanding that destroyers expected submarines to be afraid. When Harder charged destroyers instead of running from them, she violated every assumption Japanese destroyer captains held about American submarine tactics. That violation created confusion. Confusion created hesitation. Hesitation created 12 seconds. 12 seconds was enough time for torpedoes to strike. For destroyers in 4 days. A battle won before it began. 79 men who never came home. This is their story.